Just past dawn, the twig on the branch turned and stared back. By the end of this, you'll watch a soft, eyeless caterpillar swell into the head of a striking snake and see a hungry bird lose its nerve. It happened on a wet trail in the Costa Rican cloud forest, where a field naturalist leaned in to photograph what she thought was a broken stem. The stem was breathing. As she watched, the front third of the animal pulled back, swelled, and flashed two enormous eyes that had not been there a heartbeat before. And the small, honest truth is that both of those eyes are painted on. The snake is a caterpillar, wearing a face it inflates on demand. 20 feet off, a bird that had been hunting grubs went silent and would not close the distance. She had seen the trick described once, in a single line of an old field guide, filed under claims that were probably exaggerated. Now it was unfolding a foot from her lens. How a blind, boneless insect builds a convincing serpent, and why it stops a bird twice its size, is where the textbooks quietly give up. The place matters, because this only works where the disguise pays off. The cloud forests along Costa Rica's Cordillera de Tilarán sit in permanent damp, wrapped in fog for much of the day, and they are thick with exactly two things this story needs: small hunting birds, and the snakes those birds have learned to fear. Here lives the caterpillar of a hawkmoth, a plump, unremarkable larva for most of its life, chewing leaves in the canopy and doing nothing to draw attention. For weeks it is drab and slow, the easiest meal in the forest. What was known, going in, was thin. 19th century collectors had noted larvae that assumed the aspect of a serpent when disturbed, but the notes were scattered, the drawings stylized, and for a long time the behavior was treated as traveler's embroidery. Field guides mentioned it in a sentence, if at all. No one had filmed the full transformation cleanly, and no one could say what actually triggered it, how fast it ran, or whether the birds truly bought it. And here is the part worth waiting for. What this caterpillar does with its own body goes further than a painted mask. It fakes not just a face, but the strike. First, someone had to catch it in the act. The someone was a small survey team working a canopy access project in the Monteverde Reserve, mapping moth diversity with light traps and long days on foot. 3 people, mostly. A lepidopterist who knew the adult moths but had never seen this larva do its trick, a graduate student running the cameras, and a local guide who had grown up on these trails and swore the snakeheads were real. Their tools were modest: a high frame rate camera to slow the motion down, a set of macro lenses, a thermal reader to check whether the display changed the animal's surface temperature, and a great deal of patience. They were not, at first, even looking for this. The project was a census, counting species, logging host plants, and the snake mimic was a rumor they hoped to confirm on the side. For 11 days they found nothing but ordinary larvae. The guide kept pointing at bare twigs and insisting one had looked back at him that morning. The lepidopterist logged it politely and moved on. Then, on the 12th day, the student's camera caught something on a low branch that made all 3 of them stop talking at once. A fat green caterpillar that, the instant a shadow crossed it, did something no leaf eater is supposed to be able to do. A caterpillar balloons into a snake's head in about 1 second. How? On the high-speed camera, the front of the animal ballooned open between 2 frames, far faster than a soft, legless body should be able to move. A caterpillar has no bones and no fast muscle to snap a shape into place, so something else had to be driving it. The answer was hydraulics. The larva pumps its own body fluid forward into its front segments, inflating them like a water balloon, while it yanks its true legs out of sight. Pressure, not muscle, builds the head, which is why it appears almost instantly and holds rock steady. The 2 eyes are flat patches of pigment, but stretched taut over the swollen segments they catch the light in a rounded, wet, unmistakably reptilian way. The thermal reader added the next surprise. The display barely changed the animal's surface temperature, so it was costing almost nothing to run. That mattered, because a defense that is cheap can be used again and again at the first hint of a shadow. The moth this larva becomes, a sphinx moth the collectors called Hemeroplanes triptolemus, is itself plain and brown. The theater is entirely a childhood act. But knowing how the head inflated only sharpened the question the team could not yet answer. Did the birds actually fall for it? Or were they just being careful? The obstacle was the birds. Filming the caterpillar was one thing. Proving the disguise worked meant catching a real predator in the act of being fooled, and predators do not perform on schedule. The team had a window of days before the rains closed the trails, and the cloud forest fog kept smothering the light their high-speed camera needed. Twice the display fired when no bird was near, wasted on a passing hand or a falling leaf. Doubt crept in. A skeptic on the team argued they were reading intention into an accident, that the shape only looked like a snake to human eyes primed by that old field guide line, and that a bird's brain, wired differently, might see nothing but a lumpy caterpillar. It was a fair challenge, and for 3 days the footage could not answer it. The weather worsened. The student's camera fogged and died for an afternoon. The guide, unbothered, kept insisting the birds knew exactly what they were seeing because he had watched them flinch his whole life. Then, on a break in the clouds, a flycatcher dropped toward the branch, and the caterpillar did the one thing that turned a good story into a measurable fact. It did not just show the face. It moved it. A caterpillar doesn't just wear a snake's face. It strikes at attackers like one. That was the moment on the branch when the flycatcher committed and the larva answered. As the bird dropped, the caterpillar reared its inflated front back, then jabbed it forward in a short, sharp lunge, the tempo of a viper's strike, twice, without touching it. The flycatcher pulled up short, veered off, and did not come back. This is the trick a soft, blind, boneless insect uses to freeze a bird twice its size. It borrows not just the look of the forest's most feared animal, but its motion, and a predator's instinct to flinch first and check later does the rest. The strike is pure bluff. There is no venom, no fong, nothing behind the lunge but pressurized body fluid and nerve. The team caught it clean, at high frame rate, over several separate encounters, enough to rule out coincidence. In the slowed footage, the illusion is total. The false eyes track forward with the lunge. The body even flattens along its length the way a threatened snake flattens its neck. And it works on the animals that matter, not because the mimicry is perfect to our eyes, but because a bird that hesitates for even a fraction of a second against a possible viper lives longer than one that doesn't. What that hesitation was worth, once the team ran the numbers, reframed how they thought about a caterpillar's odds entirely. What changed was small and specific. The team's footage turned a scattered rumor into documented behavior. A legless larva that defends itself not with poison or armor, but with pure theater, a borrowed face, a borrowed strike, run on cheap hydraulic pressure at the first fall of a shadow. It reframed a familiar idea. We tend to think of a caterpillar as the defenseless stage, the soft thing waiting to become something better. This one had already become something else, not a snake, but a small animal that had learned, over uncountable generations, to hijack a predator's oldest fear and wear it like a mask. The moth it turns into is plain and brown and forgettable. The most dangerous thing it will ever do, it does before it can even fly, bluffing a bird into blinking one inflated second at a time.